I never imagined a Christmas could feel colder than the frost outside, but that year, it did. Not because of the wind biting through my coat, not because of the snow piling in drifts against the windows, not even because of the dim light barely cutting through the long night. No. That year, Christmas was colder because my own children left me to freeze. I want you to imagine that. Not the wind, not the snow, not the dark, but the chill of being abandoned by the people you loved most. I had spent my life building warmth for them. I had baked the bread they devoured, washed the clothes they spilled on, stayed awake nights tending to fevers, heartbreaks, and endless arguments. I had given everything I had, my time, my health, my dignity. Every Christmas before that, I had decorated the house myself, strung the lights on the tree, baked pies and cookies, and watched them laugh around me as though I was the glue holding the family together. But that year was different. It began subtly, as these things often do. My daughter, whom I had raised with my own hands, avoided my gaze when I asked if she wanted to hang ornaments with me. My son, who had once clung to me as a boy, shrugged when I offered him a piece of freshly baked bread. They were polite, yes, in the hollow way polite people can be, but warmth, care, not a trace. I remember sitting in the living room, staring at the twinkling lights, hoping, praying that perhaps it was just a misunderstanding, that perhaps they were distracted. But deep in my bones, I felt the truth before they said it. "Grandma?" my daughter finally said, her voice clipped, almost rehearsed. "We're busy. Why don't you stay in the guest room tonight?" Stay in the guest room. Stay. Yes. But they knew I would be left without a real bed, without warmth, without anyone checking to see if I was safe. Their words were soft, but the betrayal behind them was sharp enough to pierce straight through my chest. I didn't argue. I couldn't. I knew that pleading would only make me look weak. And after decades of seeing what people were capable of when they wanted something from you, or wanted to ignore you, I had learned that survival sometimes meant silence. So I nodded. "Of course," I said. "I'll be fine." And then, as they smiled and walked away, I realized the truth. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. Little did I know, that night would become a test of my life in ways no one could imagine. Even they wouldn't see me survive. By the time I stepped outside, the snow had already begun to fall in thick, heavy flakes. The wind howled like a wolf circling its prey, cutting through my thin coat, freezing the skin under my shawl, biting at my fingers, my nose, my ears. The porch steps were slippery, coated in ice, and each step was a struggle against the pull of exhaustion. I tried to steady myself, wrapping my arms around my chest, trying to gather what little warmth remained. The house behind me glowed with light, laughter faintly drifting through the windows, and I realized with a bitter sting that the laughter wasn't for me. Not that night. I thought about all the years I had given, all the sacrifices I had made. I remembered the nights I had stayed up tending to fevers, to heartbreaks, to emergencies that had kept me awake until the sun rose. And now I was left out in the snow, abandoned by the very people I had kept safe for decades. Hours stretched into eternity. I remember each minute like a lifetime. The snow crusted against my eyelashes. My fingers went numb. My legs shook uncontrollably. I wondered if this would be the night I would die alone, outside, abandoned in the freezing darkness while the world celebrated warmth and family. I remember sitting down on the icy steps, leaning against the railing for support, and letting tears streak my frozen cheeks. Not just for the cold, but for the betrayal, for the cruelty that came not from strangers, but from my own blood. I thought this night would end me, but what happened next would test every ounce of my strength. But even as despair threatened to consume me, a quiet voice in my head whispered the one truth I had learned over a long, hard life. Survival is not about waiting for someone to save you. Survival is about taking whatever life offers, no matter how small, and clinging to it with everything you have. I stumbled around the porch, searching for something, anything, to shield me from the wind. I found a forgotten blanket tucked under a chair, frost-covered but usable. I wrapped it around my shoulders, shivering violently, teeth chattering so hard I thought my jaw might break. I dug into the snow for shelter, crawling against the wall of the house, hugging the shadows where the wind was weakest. I thought about my mother, who had survived famine. I thought about my father, who had walked for miles through winter just to find food for us. I thought about every time life had knocked me down and I had risen again. And slowly, inch by inch, shivering, frozen, alone, I began to survive. I kept moving. I hummed old songs under my breath to stave off the cold. I remembered small tricks, curling my body to keep heat, rubbing my fingers together, stomping my feet to keep circulation. Pain gnawed at me. Hunger clawed at my stomach. My chest ached from the cold. But I endured, because even in abandonment, life had not yet left me. And in the darkness, I discovered something horrifying about my children, something I would never forget. Hours passed, and the world was a blur of snow and wind. I thought about my children, the very people who had promised to care for me. I thought about the years I had given them, how I had stayed silent when I disagreed, how I had cooked, cleaned, and sacrificed myself for their comfort. And yet, they had left me outside, to freeze, as though I were nothing. I realized then that betrayal often comes quietly, in small, deliberate acts that cut deeper than any slap or insult. It is a cruelty that hides behind smiles, polite words, and excuses. And yet, I also realized something else. Betrayal cannot kill the spirit that refuses to be broken. I thought about revenge, not the kind that leaves a body bruised or a home destroyed, but the kind that comes quietly, that comes from rising above, from reclaiming your dignity, from surviving when others expect you to fall. That night, freezing, alone, and trembling, I made a promise to myself. I would survive, I would endure, and I would emerge stronger than they could ever imagine. I was about to face the deadliest part of the night, and it wasn't the cold. As midnight approached, the storm intensified. Snow whipped around me in blinding sheets. My hands and feet were numb. Each step felt like walking through knives. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the end. But then, instinct took over. I crawled toward a shadowed corner, protected from the wind by a stack of firewood. I huddled there, pulling the thin blanket tighter. I thought of the life I had lived, the hunger I had endured, the nights I had cried in silence, the times I had hidden from danger only to rise stronger. I whispered to myself, "You will survive. You must." Hours passed like centuries. My lips were blue, my ears rang. And then, faintly, I heard the faintest sound of life from the house, the clatter of a dropped ornament, a muffled laugh. They were inside, warm and oblivious. I clenched my teeth, feeling a mix of rage and determination. I was alone, freezing. But that night taught me something they could never take away. The first light of morning crept over the horizon, pale and fragile, filtering through the frozen branches of the trees. I was numb, frostbitten, exhausted, but alive. The snow had drifted around me, glittering like shards of glass in the morning sun. When my children finally realized I had survived the night, panic and guilt flashed across their faces. But I did not rush inside. I did not cry or demand apology. I had survived the night they left me to die. That was my victory. That was my proof. I stood, shaking, slowly brushing the snow from my coat, my face, my hair. I felt the sun's faint warmth on my skin, and I understood that survival was a kind of triumph they could never take away. They thought they had destroyed me, but I was only beginning my true revenge. In the days that followed, I rebuilt my life quietly but deliberately. I reclaimed small acts of dignity. I chose what I ate, where I slept, and how I spent my days. I made no grand confrontations. I did not need to. The fact that I had survived was a statement in itself. I opened my eyes to a world that had shown me cruelty and indifference, and yet I still chose life, still chose hope. I realized that independence is the most potent form of revenge. When they wanted to break me, I became unbreakable. When they thought I was powerless, I found strength in solitude. And what they didn't realize was that the grandma they abandoned was now untouchable. Now, years later, I look back on that Christmas Eve with a strange mix of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the betrayal, for the cold, for the loneliness. But gratitude, too, for the lesson it taught me, for the strength it forced me to find, for the life I reclaimed by surviving when everyone had expected me to fail. The world can be cruel, children can be ungrateful, and family can betray. But no one, not even those you love most, can take away the power of a heart that refuses to be broken. That night, I froze in the snow, abandoned and alone. But in surviving, I discovered something more powerful than warmth. I discovered myself. And in that discovery, I found a Christmas gift more precious than any tree, any lights, any fleeting joy. The gift of resilience, the gift of independence, and the gift of enduring when life seems intent on breaking you.